down beside where the waters flow, down by the banks of the Ohio.
Well, that's going to be easier.
I'm going to leave for the next 20 minutes.
That's going to be easier for me because I was really a neophyte when I came to the Boston area, Club 47, to Greenwich Village. I was a high school rhythm and blues singer with a group called the Birds of Paradise. And so it was an eye-opener to realize that music could have content that describes so many aspects of our life. I thought music was like, Bing Crosby and syrupy strings, and I mean that's part of it. I think that love songs are still important, particularly if it's with a capital L. But to discover that songs of anguish, and songs of tradition, songs of impropriety, songs of refuge, songs of dispute, all of these ingredients made up folk music. And to have put that into my life meant that my life had to change, because now I couldn't live on the surface anymore. I was part of what these lyrics spoke to. And in the process of that, the phone rings and it's Mary Travers from the other side of Greenwich Village saying, I got a guy over here, can we come over and sing with you? And in through the door walks this fella and a beautiful blonde named Mary Travers. And how did you find Mary? Did you knock on her door and say, can I come in and sing?
No, I accosted her on the street and said, hey, you look smashing. Can we have a cup of coffee? I saw Mary Travers' photograph on the wall of Izzy Young's Folklore Center, where there were photographs of all the village folk singers, and I was with Albert Grossman, and I said, who is that? And he said, oh, that's Mary Travers. She'd be great if you could get her to work, quote unquote. What he meant by that, I never pressed him on it, but I think he was referring to the fact that there was a kind of a spirit in the village that Mary referred to later, where everybody had a project, but it was always a project rather than a serious, we're going to do this commitment. So, and it turned out that she was that way, and self-admitted. She was a brilliant but rebellious, thank goodness, in wonderful ways. That's what propelled me to go up and sing a little bit with Mary and say, this is interesting, but Albert's vision of Peter, Paul, Mary was not a duo, and there was a whole other connection between Mary and Noel prior to that, and I had seen Noel at the Gaslight and was knocked out, so when the three of us got together, boom, 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 it was really quite remarkable.
But you had a background in folk music that I was not aware of until fully a year into the project, where you kept bringing songs that you and Mary seemed to know about, but I never heard of.
Folk music, to me, is not just about the music at all. The music is beautiful and wonderful, and it was a part of my life since I went to what is called the High School of Music and Art, where I was an art student. But the music of everybody there was either classical music or folk music, and a little bit of doo-wop singing outside the school at 135th Street and Convent Avenue. And that was a school where your admission was to sing a song or play an instrument or bring your portfolio. What happened to me was that I loved folk music, but I became aware of its significance to me when I, at Cornell, had an undergraduate instructorship, the only one at Cornell, because all the other instructorships were graduate students, and I was, just in my senior year, in a class taught by the renowned Professor Harold Thompson, who was really a scholar in the area of folk music. And although I had it in my blood and I'd been to hootenannies and seen Pete and everything, when I was in that class I learned a lot. And on Saturdays, I would sing. We wouldn't have a class. It was considered a gut course, which means you could get an easy A. And that means a mark of an A. So when we would have the sing-along, I would see these students that were so different from my vision of what the world might be. It was so much a fraternity system school, so hierarchical, and the Jews and the Christians, you walked into the Ivy Room in the student union building and called Willard Straight, and you went to the Jewish side or the white side. The language tells you a lot. And women were, talk about not respected. I mean, it was a very dark era from which we wanted to emerge, and it was personified in that elitist environment. So when I sang with them, I was what we used to call not a nerd, but a turkey for the entire time that I was there, until my senior year, at which point everything changed, because when I sang to them, and I wasn't singing, Blowing in the Wind, which hadn't been written, or If I Had a Hammer, even though I knew it, I was singing, I asked my love to take a walk. We'd only walk just a little ways, and as we walked, and as we talked about our coming wedding day, so only say that you'll be mine, in no other's arms entwined, down beside where the waters flow, down by the banks of the Ohio. And they would be singing that kind of song, and they were transformed. What was hierarchical, alienated, privileged, houseman, their hearts just opened up, and I realized, my goodness, just by doing this, they're transformed as human beings. They're nice to each other. They're smiling at each other. They're
harmonious.
harmonious. And I realized that the world, I believed that the world would soon rid itself of a lot of these value systems and trappings that were terribly stifling to the human spirit, and that folk music was going to be a part of it. So when I graduated, instead of going to a market research firm with my experimental psychology degree, I went to Greenwich Village, Greenwich Village for those of you who are in the know. And that's what folk music means to me. It means that there is a language that is so authentic, because the songs like Banks of the Ohio were not written for money, were written because people needed to say their truth and tell their stories. And when you get infected with that positive virus, it really alters you. And you become more humane, and when you sing together, something magic happens that makes you less of a person who embraces those values at that time, out of which we grew in the 1960s in many ways. Alas, we've gone back to many of those values. That's what folk music was to me primarily. It was a vehicle for creating community and being authentic and loving each other.
Well, I think what's difficult for many people to understand is that folk music is still alive and well. It's just being expressed in a lot of different genres, albeit a smaller percentage, because as the song I sang before kind of indicates, folk music is more about substance than it is about performing style. And I don't know how many of you watched the Grammys the other night, but there's a lot of style going on at the Grammys. Rockets and fireworks and a lot of tats and a lot of absence of clothing. So it's difficult sometimes to find that stream that still lives in all these genres of music, but it is there. And when you tap into the older tunes, like Banks of the Ohio, and you have to make the poetic or metaphoric leap from something that happened a long, long time ago to contemporary times, I think it's healthy for the human spirit to do that, because to view the world as not such a new, challenging circumstance, but a continual evolution of human spirit, I think is a very healthy thing for us all to know. So the manifestation of folk music today is all around us. Whenever we hear maybe something viral like Impeachable on YouTube, or we see a bluegrass group sing about the hard times that they are having making a living, we're reminded that music not only has the ability to entertain, but also to inform and in some instances to inspire.
I would say it is music for me that really comes from the heart, really cares about telling one's true story, that really is not written for the bucks. No matter how good it sounds, there's something in there that if somebody didn't have their heart into it and were really trying to figure out how to make it, it shows up. And when you hear that kind of song that is written with that spirit, it echoes what folk music was to me as I grew up. And the fact that music business was once, really, when you think about it, Mo Austin at Warner Brothers Records, who was the head, he was really as proud of the role of music in society as he was of the music itself. They were making a lot of money. But despite that, there is a whole lot of music, a lot of music that echoes the intention and the spirit of folk music as I was talking about it, but it's not, on the hit parade, so to speak.
It reminded me of Mary's take on early folk music, where she said that folk music emanated culturally in these different pockets across America, Appalachia, in Texas, in the Dust Bowl, on the West Coast, in the urban blues of Chicago, and because there was not as much radio, as Peter pointed out, connection at that point, it was unique. And when you heard something from Nashville. You went by, oh, that really sounds different, you know, a slide guitar and a banjo, and then you'd hear something from, you know, the blues in Chicago. Oh, it's electric, you know, and that's wow. And there are those phrases put together. What has happened over the period of the last 60 years? Well, when did Marconi invent the radio? Ever since that time, we have cross-pollinized, in a sense, and now we are learning from each other. We learn musical styles, we incorporate them. The Beatles, you know, when they arrived in this country in the 60s, ascribed much of their music to listening to Elvis Presley and to Sun Record, the early Sun Records, you know, out of the South. And so we have, in a sense, become homogenized music. But lyrically, the challenge, I think, is still, as Peter has said, is to find the heart pushes us to express, as artists, something that nobody else is saying. And therein lies the unique quality of folk music, because you say it whether you get paid for it or not.
America's obsession with fame, notoriety, wealth, and you know, and also unearned. The term Hall of Fame, I accept that it exists, but I think if you were to say to Pete Seeger, Pete, you're really famous, he'd say, oh, wow. You know, it's just, it's something else characterizes it, which is less about acknowledgement and more about intent, more about the way people really created something that really did come from their hearts. And I would hope that the recognition of the people who walked that walk and were stung by that marvelous inclination and were inspired in that way and found themselves in that wonderful path that inoculated them from a lot of the falsity that is so dominant in, you know, greed and worship of material things, etc. Those, to acknowledge those people who lived that and carried that on in their own honesty, not necessarily singing folk songs as they were sung. Yes, the New Lost City Ramblers, extraordinary, but because they really, really captured that idiom and did it beautifully. But people like Joni Mitchell, who, you know, still, boy, when you hear, you know, some of her songs, or, you know, it's the same stream as Odetta. She did it, as Noel said, because money or no, I'm going to say what I have to say, and I'm going to tell some truth. So the acknowledgement is wonderful.
I realize that folk music is kind of a commentary on the timeline of the world, and that, in fact, a folk museum, because it is saluting the intersection of folk music with culture in a unique and historic way, has an opportunity to draw those lines, you know, to take those pictures from the March on Washington, to take that picture from Club 47 when Odetta appeared, to take the blues singers from Chicago, to take those people who have surfaced in the music community, not so much by their talent, which was considerable, but by the manner in which they saluted the times in which they lived. I think that'll make for a very interesting walk.
I think it's really important that this is being done, because there's so many ways in which I feel that the existence of this kind of music is a healing exercise in exchange, and particularly for kids. it creates an environment when they sing this kind of music that is resonant with that kind of authenticity and caring and respect. It really helps to build a relationship amongst them in classrooms or peace marches, whatever. That's so desperately needed now. And so this is really, I think, a positive, meaningful step forward. I'm just thinking, it could be folk music all of honor, because what we're doing is honoring the spirit rather than saluting the faith.
And then, have you come to peace with what Louis Armstrong said about folk music?
Never.
But do you understand the wisdom of it?
Well, you're presuming that's a leading question.
I'm presuming wisdom.
Let the record show that the inclusion of the word wisdom is like saying, when did you last kiss your wife, beat your wife, or honor your wife, or whatever.
Well, all right. It's generally given to Louis Armstrong that when asked about folk music, the uniqueness of it, or what he thought about it, he said, "Hey, man, everything is folk music. You never heard a horse sing, did you?" To me, that's a larger truth. And that's why all of the aspects of music have to be examined, because they're all, at some point or another, an expression of a need or an expression of a desire. And if that desire is tracked back to just making a buck, then so be it. But if it's tracked back to making a better world, then so be it.
What does that have to do with never heard a horse sing?
What does it have to do with it?
Yes.
Okay, let me answer that with a question. Have you ever heard a horse sing?
No, of course not. But what does that have to do?
Then it's not called horse music. That's the joke. That's what I was trying to say. Otherwise, you call it horse music, or life music, or
Music to life?
well, thank you.
Thank you, guys.